Alright guys, now welcome to my channel, and if you watched my first video, thank you, and that's good because now you should have successfully learned how to drift, or at least have an idea of how to drift. But with every good drift car has a good suspension setup. After this video, I can help you out with suspension tuning. Now let's go to the track. Alright guys, so now we are finally back at the track and we're at Suzuka Circuit. This is a different circuit than we were in my previous video, but let's just hop straight into the car settings. Now, like I said, I'll try my best to show you how I tune cars personally, and maybe if you do not understand what something means, I'll try to explain that best for you to hopefully get you dialed in. Alright, so first things first is the quick tune settings. GT Sport is probably the only game that has upgrades like this in levels. Forza and Gran Turismo 6 were more traditional, so you can specifically choose what you want to be upgraded. So as long as you have mileage points, you should be fine. So for horsepower numbers, my sweet spot is 600 horsepower, and I typically don't go over that. And if I get a car that has more than 600 standard, like the Hellcat Charger that's in this game, I'll just tune the suspension because that's my preference. For the sake of this video, I'll tune up this 240, or this 180 actually, to 400 horsepower, and I'll see how it'll react. Now for weight reduction, it's all about personal preference. You can go as light as you want. So for the sake of this video, I'll just put it up to level 2. Next is your traction, tires, and brakes. Now in my previous video, I said traction control has to be off, so let it be off. Now for your tires, like I said also, comfort hards are the way to go front and rear. But someone might be asking, can I drift any other tire on this list? Of course you can, it's a video game. But realize, the lower on this list, the more amounts of grip. So realize, to a drifter point of view, you want to have very low amounts of tire grip so you can get your car sideways. And that's all you typically care about when you're drifting. That's why I said pick comfort hards front and rear. And for your brakes, I typically keep it 0. I want it to be as factory, as OEM as possible, so I typically just do not mess with brakes at all. Now you can, but I personally don't. Ride height. Now you can run the default settings provided, but typically you would want a low car when it comes to drifting. So usually I have 2 rules when adjusting ride height. Number 1, you can slam the car completely if the ratio provided is at the same height. So you can see in this 180, it's 531, 531. So I can just slam it. For number 2, if the car came with a certain ratio, like the car is slightly higher in the back than in the front, I will just respect that. So I will still lower the car, but the car will still be slightly higher in the back than the front. Natural frequency. Now this is equivalent to running a certain spring rate in a car from real life. And typically when you're building a drift car or a track car, you typically want a stiffer spring rate, front and rear. You do not want to run a softer spring rate because that's more of the suspension will react to this, or the whole car will react to this. And you will typically see softer suspension and a drag racing setup. You want the car to have less body roll and be predictable. So along with having very low ride height, having a higher spring rate or frequency will help the car feel more sharp and become more predictable, because that's what you want in drifting. Anti-roll bars or sway bars. And the general rule of thumb when tuning for sway bars in video games is stiff front, loose rear, understeer, and loose front, stiff rear equals oversteer. And for a drift car, you would typically want understeer. So in terms of setups that you should run on your car to try out, you would typically run 2 setups, 8 and 4 like you see right now, or 10 and 5. Damping ratios, compression and rebound. And actually I do not mess with this setting at all. I usually treat this just like my brakes. I just don't touch it. For most of my drifting setups, the 60 and 90 is pretty good. The car still reacts close to stock with the car being lowered and having the frequency turned up a little bit. Negative camber and toe angle. I have a simple trick to adjust these values for all of my drift cars. And and what I use is the factory alignment specs. If you go online and search for your car of choice along with the term factory alignment specs, you might have to do some digging, but usually you'll find what you're looking for. I'll post a website that I use to tune my camber and tow for my 180 in the description. For your drivetrain, you have your differential, and you have two choices, either your standard or your fully customizable diff. Usually when I adjust it for my drift car, I just try to mimic the factory settings for my initial torque. So if you see it says 50 for the initial torque, I'll put this up to 50, and then I just don't touch the acceleration or the braking. Alright, last but not least is the manual transmission, and there's two choices: either stay stock or go to a sequential transmission. Now, if you realize, if you drive older vehicles in this game, they will obviously come with a manual transmission, and sometimes it'll always sound like the clutch is slipping between gear changes. You know, half of it is because we're playing on controller, and the other half is because it's a manual transmission. It can only do so much nowadays. So when it comes to older vehicles in this game, I'll typically put this on. But on the other hand, let's say if I'm driving a car that is an automatic transmission with a flappy paddle gearbox, like a BMW M4, I wouldn't put this mod on because I'm pretty sure those cars come factory with a DCT. So for this mod, it's just all comes to personal preference. The good thing about switching to it is if you switch to a sequential transmission, it will keep the factory ratio, but you'll realize that your top speed is very, very low. Now in a drift car, you don't worry about top speed, but typically 112 miles per hour is not that fast. So sometimes if you would at least try to match it, you can say, oh, fifth gear is apparently 190 miles per hour, so I can switch to it and go close to it, like 193, 186, which is more than enough. And that's typically what I do for manual transmissions. For the sake of this video, I will put one on and I'll adjust it to my liking, and that's really it. Alright, so now the car is completely done, and now it's time for a testing tune. And I just want to make sure the car is fully dialed before I hop online. It's a little bit rough. Dude, I literally mirrored like everything.